Since early in the morning, when the sun hasn't risen yet, people who are going to the caminata make their way to the trucks that will take them to the starting point. Once arrived, having eaten tamales with coffee and pan, the journey begins. Carrying the saints, San Lucas and San Cristobal, the community from Cuznawat walks along with them and take turns to carry them. The path is along a mountain and considered sacred. It has seen many generations giving life to this caminata left by ancestors. The scenery that the path reveals along the way can be appreciated by everyone. It takes the effort of the whole community to carry this out. As everyone walks, the drum accompanies the saints for the 5 hours this journey takes. The destination for today, Tepecoyo, a town that Cuznawat has been compadres with for hundreds of years. Once arrived, the saints greet each other in an act that is the purpose of the caminata, a visit. The caminata and visit are yearly activities that take place among cofradías and is central to indigenous peoples' history, festivities, and worldviews. My name is Yanci Rosales, and through my project, we do not depend on you, Nawat-Pipil efforts in preserving identity and ancestral knowledge in Western El Salvador. I explore how a cultural institution called cofradía has been appropriated by two Nawat-Pipil communities to maintain ancestral knowledge and resist colonial systems of oppression. During the summer of 2024, I spent 2 months in El Salvador conducting my research. During this time, the Nawat-Pipil communities of Izalco and Cuiznahuat received me and helped me conduct my project. They're located in the department of Sonsonate in the western part of El Salvador. During that time, I conducted 11 interviews and participated in communal gatherings. Upon talking to locals and through interviews, cofradías became a recurring topic and their importance gradually became clear. This is when they became the focus of my project in investigating their importance for both communities. Cofradías are religious brotherhoods rooted in Catholicism. This institution originated in Europe and was introduced to Latin America by the Catholic Church during the beginning of colonization in attempts to instill Catholic teachings to indigenous peoples. Today, cofradías are found among indigenous communities across Latin America, including Mexico, Guatemala, and also in the Caribbean, among African descendant communities in the Dominican Republic. The purpose of a cofradía is to celebrate a saint or deity annually among its members. However, cofradías in Latin America differ from European ones in that they have something called syncretism. The syncretism that exists in cofradías was first explained to me by Don Agustin, who is Nawat-Pipil originario from Izalco. He served as leader of the community by being elected alcalde del común, which is a position as the mayor of the alcaldía del común, the only ancestral government of the community. He shared that 36 cofradías, in most of them there's a syncretism that we give life to. We celebrate the image because it was really imposed on us, to take away our tradition of honoring our Mother Earth, nature, everything that pertains to our worldview. In religious anthropology, syncretism refers to the blending of belief systems. In Abya Yala, this often happens when indigenous religions faced with European Christianity take on the visible parts of Catholicism while keeping the deeper meanings of their own spiritual traditions. In Izalco, the majority of cofradías are syncretic and hold Nawat-Pipil cultural components such as musical instruments, food, and spirituality. Originarios have been able to maintain them by adapting to the religion imposed by the Spanish. Don Agustin explained that while Catholicism was meant to erase indigenous religion, cofradías became a way for Nawat-Pipil communities to adapt and embed their worldviews within this imposed structure. This is how cofradías become important. At first glance, like in the video where Cuiznahuat's visit to Tepecoyo takes place, outer forms of Catholicism are observed, like the saints' images or the caminata, which could be considered a pilgrimage, an act commonly done in Catholicism. However, in order to maintain components of their culture, indigenous peoples conceal them, and they may not be noticeable. This was and still is a process of adaptation which is complex and involves many layers in both towns. For example, in both communities, various historical events were recalled by participants to emphasize the challenges they've had to adapt to. I argue that these challenges can be seen through a subtle colonial lens. Settler-colonialism can be understood as when nation-states are formed during independence but colonize their state and continue to oppress and displace indigenous peoples. Colonialism then becomes a structure, not an event. El Salvador fits this description and has taken part in oppressive actions, such as the 1932 massacre known as La Matanza. This event was recalled by Teresa, a communal leader of Cuiznahuat, who's a Cofradia member and Nawat-Pipil originaria. She shared that the abuelos' generation were no longer taught, no longer performed the rituals, because when what happened in Izalco took place, the rituals were practically erased for these communities. Here she refers to La Matanza, where the nation-state persecuted indigenous peoples with fear and repression, and uses Izalco as a reference point, given that it was one of the towns most affected by the massacre, where more than 10,000 people were killed by the military government in response to uprisings of indigenous communities and Ladinos protesting for government reforms of land dispossession and forced labor. Teresa explains that after La Matanza, abuelos stopped practicing spiritual rituals out of the fear lived during this time. As a result, generational teachings of spirituality stopped, thus why abuelos don't currently practice it. Teresa then added, and people still do it, but in a more hidden way. If there's a baile del puro, what does that mean? That spirituality is present within the community. She emphasizes that spiritual rituals didn't fully disappear. They're present in cofradías in more subtle ways. Baile del Puro is a tradition that contains Nawat-Pipil spirituality and signifies abuelos' wisdom. It's practiced in Cuiznahuat's cofradía and among towns they have kinship relations with. The introduction of this ritual to this institution has allowed its transmission even in light of the nation's oppressive acts, through its subtle practice in spaces that allowed for concealment. In the same manner, more recently, Nawat-Pipil of Izalco, like many other indigenous communities, have had to resist another form of cultural erasure, folklorization. This is a nation-state project that reinvents or recycles indigenous people's culture as a money-making strategy. The Salvadoran government relies on this as a way to attract tourism, and it stems from mestizaje. In short, mestizaje is a nationalistic ideology of set of colonial nations that was incorporated in Latin America as part of the nation-building processes. That includes El Salvador. And it consists of creating the idea of a new race that includes a mixture between indigenous and Spanish that would essentially allow to homogenize the nations, celebrate the mythic history of Indians, and leave their racial inferiority in the past. Folklorization reinforces these nationalistic ideas by portraying indigenous peoples in romanticized ways and as entities from the past. Folklorization was first brought up by Don Agustin, where he explained how the government does so-called cultural acts in the country's capital. There, it utilizes dress that is not native to indigenous communities of the region, but portrays it as such. They also take indigenous cultural practices outside of their spaces to be performed by outsiders, without even asking for consent. Izalco's ancestral government is deeply intertwined with cofradías. The mayordomos, who are the leaders of cofradías, choose the mayor of the commune. The mayor then makes decisions regarding the Nawat-Pipil community and cofradías. As explained by Don Agustin, everything that is done here is with the support of the community. Likewise, it is the cofradías that give it legitimacy. One institution cannot exist without the other, nor without the support from the community. Through these structures, Nawat-Pipil communities practice self-governance and regain ownership over their cultural practices against the nation-state folkloric acts. This is a form of self-determination, which indigenous psychologists recognize as essential to well-being. Well-being includes the recognition of indigenous people's historical and political conditions shaping their lives and the ability to sustain cultural practices in spite of those conditions. Through adaptation and reinforcement, they maintain connections to culture. This, in indigenous psychologists, is identified as of highest importance to the flourishing of indigenous individuals, families, and communities. The influences that the Nawat-Pipil communities have had since the imposition of Catholicism have given shape to the institutions seen in their communities in current times. The appropriation of cofradías is one of the processes of adaptation they've had to go through in order to maintain cultural components. It's the reinforcement of their histories, communal support, and their sovereignty that serves as an integral part of their communities and reflect the challenges they continue to see by the nation-state. I argue that the adaptation itself and the legacy and guidance of abuelos as it is in the Agustin highlighted, is one of the ways Nawat-Pipil strengthen themselves. Cofradías are significant because they carry the knowledge and traditions of the past. The community takes pride in their syncretism as it reflects the wisdom of their abuelos. By acknowledging both past and present struggles, they highlight how the ongoing adaptation of cofradías remains a powerful act of resilience and cultural preservation. In indigenous psychologies, these cultural practices are key to community well-being, as they strengthen connections to ancestral knowledge and reinforce collective identity. Studying these institutions reveals how indigenous communities continue to navigate and resist the oppressive structures of settler colonial nations.